and BT are going to have a long conversation. It's possibly going to involve quite a lot of talking on my part and less on theirs. Hello, everyone. Let's see who we got in today. Hello. Right then. Pop out that. Make sure that's nice and large. Hello, everyone. We've got live chat up. I will put this up now because there are always people who ask me. There is a long patrol for this. It's already recorded. It's in the bank for tomorrow. Because tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I thought you might want one, which I've done my best to keep below 50 minutes, because I know Christmas Eve can be very busy, but I thought people might want a quick burst of naval history to get them through Christmas Eve, to get them through all the family time. So there is a naval history, there is a video out. There is also another one coming out on Christmas Day, and another one coming out on Boxing Day, and there's supposed to be a live on Boxing Day if my family are happy to be hard from me. And there's another video scheduled in for Monday, already recorded, which will be recorded after this. And there will be then the long patrol as advertised on the following Tuesday. And we'll see if I can keep this up a video a day till New Year's Day, because basically I'm trying to be nice to you, because I realise we're all at this current time. How do I put this politely? Well, if you're anything like me, as much as you love the people you are living with and shielded with, because they are your family, you've already been shielded with them and seeing pretty much mostly them for the last few months anyway. And now this is just extra time. And as much as you do love them, you really do love them, even though one of their predilections to nicking your sellotape has forced you to have to buy a pink sellotape holder, which is from a very, very suspicious company name. Yeah, I'm slightly worried about the company name, but we'll leave that to one side. It's a lovely pink one, and because neither of the other members of the family will actually ever claim to own a pink one, neither will ever nick it. So it is safe. And I can survive. Right, hello Peter Dawson, hello Vision, hello John Shea, hello Rick Sava, happy Christmas everyone, hello Alaski, hello Timmy Lucker, hello Sean V, hello Vision, hello DG40, hello Jonathan Barrow, hello Matthias Slavic, hello Team George Newman, hello Infinity Binvids, hello. Well, that's to me actually, that's my message. Alex, is that an electronic blue Peter? It feels like it sometimes. For some reason, literally as I was about to go live and start talking to you all, the internet died completely in the offices. I went into the house, it was died again. And I basically had to restart everything, and that wasn't working. Amazing. Takes real skill. And now it's apparently jumped from the normal internet to the Wi-Fi. I'm not sure why. So if there's any degradation, you know what. Oh, now the internet's back. Who knows what's going on. This could be fun. So if we do skip, you know why. It's the internet playing up, and I do apologize. This is why I'm going with recorded videos over the Christmas period, other than possibly the live. Team Locker, I didn't need to know the thing about the sauna time tomorrow, but I'm glad it's helpful. Colin Cameron, if I need, just finish your book. If you do end up in Glasgow and need photos or a vid recorder, drop me a line as I'm here already. I will do. I also have family members up in Glasgow, a fair number in the local police force. It's fun times. That's why I use pink duct tape at my last couple of joint photo shoots. Hello, Gia Guy. Death Squad, no. No. The Google, YouTube might actually work out Russian for that one. Hello, Kenrick Johnson. Hello, Gia Guy. And Alazowski, hello. Mid-March will be 2 years since my company made an evacuation to work from home. Nice to have my office 5 minutes from my bed, but well, 2 years. Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I got back to going into university 1 day a week at one point, and that was over very quickly. So quickly. But now I'm back having a car, which is great. Me and the dog visited Headley today. Anyway, let's get back to actually the starting what we're talking about. Today's topic is a patron. And it's strategic and tactical thinking on RN submarines and RN anti-submarine forces between the wars. Now, this is the point I'm going to be making quite a lot. This is what the Royal Navy leaves World War I with. They have the V-class destroyer, which there is a debate as to their qualities versus the four-stackers. But usually my view is the four-stackers better fit what the US Navy needs from a destroyer. And I would say the V and the Ws fit what the Royal Navy needs from a destroyer in the beginning of the 1920s and mid-1920s far better than the four-stackers would. And they have the L-class, which are evolutions of the very successful E-class. They're fairly decent submarines. They're mainly good for things like the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic, though. And the Royal Navy very quickly realizes this, and you see this in what they choose to build. Because these are good submarines for if you want a large sub vis-a-vis equivalent to the Mediterranean, or a standard-sized sub for the Atlantic. But they're not really that great for the Pacific. Vision, is socialism and capitalism or financialization to blame BT? I just blame British Telecom. I honestly, look, I have my hands tied. It's the thing I find most interesting about my family. My mother is incredibly loyal, and we've had the same power supplier and the same phone supplier and internet supplier for the entire time we've been here, to the extent that we've even got BT television, because they offered it her the internet, and it's from BT, so it must be good. And my mother, who is otherwise an incredibly intelligent and very wonderful woman, is just a little bit blind when it comes to power utilities companies. She's never changed. She's their dream customer. They put up the bill, she complains a bit, she pays it, and she doesn't ever change. Ever. They give her lousy service. She complains. They promise they'll fix it. She still doesn't change. But that's off topic. Don't get me a team like under BT television. Don't get me started. Oh, it's atrocious. It's absolutely terrible. Oh well. So, the thing is, the Royal Navy has pretty much the best submarine available in terms of the L-class in any navy in the early 1920s. There are other submarines which come about which are quite good, but this is pretty much, as far as they're concerned, they're all either much of a muchness, or they have different they have some bits where they're slightly better and some bits where they're slightly worse, but the L-class is pretty darn good. And they have the V and the W class. And this is a modified W-class destroyer. And again, they are pretty darn good. And the Royal Navy is practicing with them. They are trying to work out what they're going to do. They are practicing their anti-submarine warfare. And this is the point. You cannot develop submarine capabilities if you do not have anti-submarine capabilities, because you do not know what you're likely to be fighting. And vis-a-vis, you can't do the same with anti-submarine capabilities without decent submarine capabilities. This is my biggest, reason for complaining, other than the operational capabilities and the enhancements they bring to fourth generation, but why the Royal Navy doesn't have SSKs anymore, and why the US Navy doesn't have SSKs anymore. Because that means you either have to do the US Navy does, which is regularly import them from other allied navies to practice against, but really you don't understand them. or you don't, and you hope you are still good. Because the trouble is, and this is the other problem, you need enough submarines and enough anti-submarine warfare units. You can practice against each other to hone your submarines' capabilities of getting close to their targets against what you hope is the best, and to hone your anti-submarine warfare specialists into taking out their targets, which you hope are the best. You need both. The Royal Navy is amply supplied in both. For many years in the interwar period, they have not just the largest on paper submarine force and anti-submarine warfare specialist forces, but they actually have the largest in reality because they're actually available and working. Some navies can look bigger on paper than they are in reality. The French Navy is great at this. They always look fairly decent on paper. Then you ask them how many they actually have operating, and they're going, operating? Oh, no, but look at this really nice cheese. We got it from HMS Rodney's hidden locker. Hello, Carver Gosberg. Oh, hello, Melanie 1640. Remember, I don't know too much about it other than the basic ideas. Sonar, close, depth check, do it again until oil appears. Pretty much. So Aztec doesn't come in till 1920, and it doesn't really get a lot of widespread fitting because it takes time to get it right. So about 1924, 25, there's a sufficient number that are actually training them. So they have the torpedoes. They have, and so these have torpedo. The reason the L class are so much better is they have larger torpedo tubes than the E class, which gives them better weapons to attack with. The W and V class, they can be fitted with Aztec. So they're testing against them. They're trying to work out. But there is a problem with that. There is one very big problem with exercises and the Royal Navy scenario. The L-class submarines are good for the North Atlantic. They're okay for the Mediterranean. They're all right for the Indian. They are nowhere near what you want for the Far East. They're not long-ranged enough. Same happens with the V&W destroyers. They are fine for if you're fighting in the North Sea, and okay in certain stretches of the North Atlantic. They'll do perfectly well in the Mediterranean. They don't need to be particularly long range. They're particularly massive for that one. The Indian Ocean with modifications, and the Far East with modifications. And again, that's actually easier to do with surface ships than it is to submarines, because you do too many surface modifications on a submarine, you're liable not to see it again. Whereas surface ships tend to be able to survive being modified. You just notice how much lower they keep getting in the water, and eventually you decide you need to take something off. Basically, it starts off with, we float like this, and this is the water level. And then it's a case of, we float like this, and that's not so good. And we float like, we're starting to float like this. And you sort of go, okay, we might have put a little bit too much on it. Okay. All right. And then, we float like this, we're now stern heavy. Okay, right then we need to take something off the end. Fine. Whereas a submarine goes out, you go, oh, it's sinking, it's supposed to. Yeah, that's good. Not coming up. Not coming up. Sugar. So, you have a huge area of operations for the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy realizes this. And it's a similar problem for the Royal Navy as pretty much I've presented many, many times at the end of before World War II. Which theatre are you actually going to be fighting a war in? Because if you're fighting a war against the Germans, the odds are they're going to go sub-fleet because they ain't got anything surface ships, and they're not allowed subs. The Royal Navy never trusts them; they won't go for subs. So then you're likely need to escort. But remember, there's a lot more ships than the merchant ships that come in this area that would need to be escorted. But then you've got the Mediterranean. Well, if you're fighting a war in the Mediterranean against the Italians, then sorry, you're sealing off the Gibraltar and you're sealing off the Suez Canal, and then the merchant trade is just going to have to go round Africa. It ain't going to like it, but that's what it's going to have to do. And then you'll deal with Italy. So then you don't have to worry so much about convoys, but you do have to worry about fleet maneuvers, because in those waters, and your own submarines in those waters, they're going to have to be quite small and nimble. Admittedly, again, you won't need perhaps as many because you've got Malta, Gibraltar, and Alexandria. You've got 3 bases to operate from. Which means that your submarines, they're not going to have to, their patrols are not going to have to be that longer journeys to get to their patrol area. And that means you don't need as many submarines. Because if, let's say, you're Germany, you're covering the North Atlantic, you need a lot of submarines because they have to go out a long way to get to their patrol zones and then come back a long way. And that all adds up to time at sea, which increases maintenance time and all sorts of issues and wear and tear on the crew. Whereas if your ship is based on Malta and its job is to patrol the central Mediterranean, log. Oh, we're here. Where are the Italians? That's the thing. It's a case of the Italians are right there. The Italians are right on top of them. And then you have the Indian Ocean. Well, who's likely to be fighting the Royal Navy in the Indian Ocean? No one. Let's be honest, the strongest naval power other than the British out there is Australia. For some reason, the British aren't too worried about the Australians deciding to pick a fight with them in the Indian Ocean. Mainly because they're fairly certain the Australians need their help to deal with any Japanese. Okay, well, that becomes your big problem. Because where are your sub-bases going to be for fighting Japan? Well, eventually they're going to be Weihai. That's the aim. But to get there, you're going to have to retake Hong Kong and retake Weihai, because you're probably going to lose those at the beginning of any war. So, to start interdict Japanese operations, you could well have your submarines actually, and this is the one thing which I would expect to be operating from Singapore in large numbers, especially for a long period of the war, would be submarines. Which means your submarines need to be long range, because they need to motor through the South China Sea, which is no small distance. And then they need to appear in, well, go past Taiwan. Probably, I would honestly say they would probably not go through the Taiwanese Straits, but go to the west of Taiwan, to the east of Taiwan, and then go up to Japan, and they would be starting the blockade. And the aim would be to interdict trade between Japan, Korea, that sort of triangle, and Hong Kong area. And that would be where the submarines would be deployed, because this was part of the Royal Navy's idea. The Royal Navy has some of the most offensive and aggressive submarine operations planned of any of the big 3 navies. Mainly because they've seen how effective submarines can be, and they fully intend on applying that. Hi, Gary Salsky. That is why the diesel sub was able to sink US supercarrier exos. Pretty much, because a diesel submarine operates very differently to a nuclear submarine. A nuke boat is a very different concept of operations to a diesel boat. Diesel boat is a mobile minefield. They have a smaller radius of action because they're not able to do high-speed sprints, but they are far more quiet. They pretty much turn everything on, so they become a mine. They became basically a minefield, sitting there. And pop, 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 torpedoes everywhere. Whereas a nuke boat, that's a what I'd call a dash hunter, in that it will detect, sound off, detect the task group moving, work out its range, dash to get ahead of it, fire some torpedoes, and then dash away at high speed and disappear again. So they're both ambush predators, but one's a dash and splash scenario. One's a, we're waiting here, you're coming to us, you're coming to us, you're coming to us. And one of the things you have to remember with submarines is they are incredibly densely packed with technology and incredibly technical things to build. The example I would give is, in this book, I talk about 3 different classes of destroyer. Yes, shameless plug going on. But in it, you've got the daring class, the battle class, and the triber class. By far and away, the most densely packed of these is the battle class. They are incredibly densely packed with equipment and technology. They are nowhere near, they're not even in the same league of things being densely packed as a T class, though. One of the other questions I often get about the things people go, well, why did the Royal Navy not introduce snorkels when they got them off the Dutch, the same as the Germans could have? Well, the Germans did. The Royal Navy could have got off the Dutch the same as the Germans did. And I go, well, the Royal Navy were looking at the design and going, what's the snorkel value for us? What does the snorkel replace? Or what do we have to, design changes do we have to make to include a snorkel versus what does it give us? If you ever think about it, for the Germans, a snorkel makes sense. They have to go through the North Sea, which is being patrolled by a lot of Allied aircraft. They have to go into North Atlantic, where there's a lot of aircraft. If you're sort of about the Japanese, are they putting up lots of anti-submarine aircraft? What about the Italians? Well, again, they have some, but they're not doing the same role in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is not the same anti-submarine warfare scenario for the British submarines as it is as the North Atlantic is for the German submarines. And eventually, the snorkel is not as valuable to the British, it's decided operationally, as other things. What do the British submarines have earlier? Radar. What do they have? All sorts of equipment is added in. Mm-hmm. Even look, for most of it to be exact at the times. Yes, I know, but I try and keep some of the geography relevant. It's like I tend to call it Sri Lanka rather than Ceylon, unless I'm explaining things all the time. Hello, Anna Rajapal. That's good. They wouldn't go west of Taiwan because of West Taiwan. Well, honestly, the Japanese in China are not causing that much of a problem from a submarine perspective. Good luck to you, Mum Dirt Squad. Vision. SSK is coastal battleship and SSN is battleship. Honestly, no. I have a reason for this, but as I've said it before, submarines being compared to battleships is a very, very bad road to go down, because battleships could be used for something which submarines can't be used for, and that's presence missions. Submarines are incredibly useful assets for fighting a war. They're not necessarily such good assets for deterring a war, other than in the strategic ballistic missile case, because in the SSBN submarines, they're the very nature of their invisibility makes them a far more useful deterrent. But that conversely doesn't help with conventional deterrence, where the visibility tends to be the deterrent factor. Right. And the other thing about T-Class you realise is this is an evolutionary design of what's come before it. You can look at this and you can see traces of the L-Class. You can see the ORs and Ps, and I'll be talking about them, and you can see what comes next. Now, you have to remember, this is not a double-hulled design. As you can see, it's a saddle tank design. Especially if you look at the cross-section. Which was quite common at the time. Now, what is interesting with all these boats is the level of development that goes into making them good for underwater performance versus on the surface performance. Because at a certain point in the 20s, it really starts to shift. In the 20s, you still have some of the World War I legacy of, right then, we need to be fast on the surface. Still being a factor. Still being something there you have to remember. Yeah. The RN tried to use the first attempts to install radar, SD and the SI sets. They weren't targeting systems. They weren't targeting radar. They were search radar. And they were used on the submarines. Well, there's a debate as to when they get fitted in, whether it's late 1940, early 1941. We do know some of the first attacks seem to take place are admitted as taking place, having used information gathered by the radar on the submarines in mid to late 1941. So presumably they've been fitting the sets for a while before, to get used to them, because it takes a while. But that's one of the factors the Royal Navy's putting in. It's radar. They made a decision to install that. And most of the sets they put in are orientated around giving them an air search capability, i.e. spot aircraft before they come in and attack, as well as a bit of a surface search capability. Because again, though, remember, because they are so close to the surface of the ocean relative to what you'd install on a carrier or something like that, their range is not that massive as radar goes. So, these are the OPRs, and they are the first response to the L-Class, because the RN goes, we have these submarines. They are good submarines. But are they good in the Pacific? No, they are not. So, we will fix it. We will build the Odin class. Now, to be honest, the Odin class starts off with, we'll build one vessel. Did it go well? It sort of fitted the brief, but not quite. Okay. We'll build two more. Are they better? Yeah, they're getting there, but we've got new ideas. We're gonna change the design again. Okay. We'll build 6 of these. We have our Odin class, and the fact that it's not named for either of the first three boats, which are the test boats, we will leave to one side. We have got, though, 9 boats. Is that enough? No, we have a slightly better design ready. Okay, right then. We'll build the Parthian class. 6 will be launched in a single year. And there are whole years when U-boat construction doesn't get anywhere near that for the German Navy in the 1930s. And this is in 1929. And then after that they go, no, we could make a slightly better design. If you're noticing this is an iterative approach, it is. And there you go, the Parthians come out, 4 of them. And the RN looks at this thing and goes, this is good. If you think about it, this gives them 19 boats, which are all entirely focused around the Pacific. They have built 19 boats for the Far East Station. That's quite a healthy, decent commitment. Okay, yes, Singapore's not defended, hasn't got its defences built properly, and there's no real decent chain of command structure in Malaya, and we'll leave all that to one side, but the Royal Navy is doing the best it can. It can't really muck around in the army side of things, but it's tried to build 19 boats whose focus is on Far East deployments. No, they won't always all be there, but a large number of them will be, and they will make up the bulk of the submarine force for the Royal Navy in the Far East for most of the 1930s. The trouble is for these big boats is when they're called back, they mostly end up in the Mediterranean, which is not that good. Hello, Kevin Ray. Thanks for becoming a supporter. Hope you like the emojis and the emojis. Gudrun, honestly, yes, you agreed to that analogy a few months ago as far as their roles as submarines. One is coastal defense and one is the other blue water navy. Yeah, but I don't think I said coastal battleship and battleship. If I did agree to that, then I must have been suffering from lack of iron brew at the time. So, the OPRs are very good boats, and honestly, it's one of those things of history. They go down as being not so good boats because so many of them get sunk. And really, that's because, well, how do I put this politely? I'm just looking up the map I've got somewhere of them, their sinkings. Ah, there it is. Yay, there it is. Right. So, Oberon, which was the first test vessel, that survived World War II, scrapped in 1945. Ottaway, scrapped in 1945. Oxley was actually sunk by Triton, a T-class boat. That was, I'll be getting onto that class, in September 1939 when it was mistaken for a German boat. In an incident which both ships managed to escape, crews managed to escape any blame because everything that could be done was done on both sides, but both sides didn't understand really what the other one was saying. But here is the reality. Okay, so one's already been sunk in the North Atlantic, in sort of the North Atlantic when they're supposed to be. The North Atlantic's fine, but they're really Pacific boats. Odin, sunk by an Italian destroyer in the Gulf of Taranto. Olympus, Mind of Malta. Orpheus, sunk by an Italian destroyer in Mediterranean in June 1940. And by the way, Odin was also lost in June 1940. Olympus was May 1942. Osiris, the one pictured, well, she managed to survive till September 1946 when she scrapped. Oswald, she was sunk by an Italian destroyer off Calibri in August 1940. Notice a thing here, 3 of them got sunk in 1940 and 1 in 1939. And Otis was also scuttled off in 1946 off Durban. I'm not sure if Osiris wasn't scuttled as well, rather than scrapped in Durban. I do sometimes wonder if you fancy a nice diving trip. If you can go and dive off the coast of Durban, you might find a whole load of Royal Navy submarines if you can get down to deep enough where they are. But this means that of the 9 completed, 6 are lost. 3 are lost in 1940 in the Mediterranean. 1 is lost in the North Atlantic, off the coast of Norway, when in a friendly fire incident. And the other one is mined in the Mediterranean. So these are submarines which are designed for Far East operations and Far East deployments, and they are lost almost uniformly in the Mediterranean. See a small problem developing here. Next comes the Parthian class. They're also good vessels, and 5 of them are lost in World War II. Where are they lost? Well, Pandora is sunk in harbour at Valletta, Mediterranean. Parthian is mined in the Adriatic. Perseus is mined in the Ionian Sea off the coast of Greece, another in the Mediterranean. Phoenix is presumably sunk by an Italian torpedo boat off the coast of Sicily in 1940. Poseidon is sunk in an accidental collision with a merchant steamer in 1931, so she never makes World War II, although the wreck was alleged to have been salvaged by China during the 1970s. And Proteus is the only one that survives World War II. So 1's lost pre-war, and the remaining 4 are lost in the Mediterranean. There's a theme developing here. Rainbow class. Okay. Rainbow sunk in 1940 in collision with Italian merchant ship Antonietta Costa. Regent sunk by mines near Barletta, Apulia, Italy. Regulus, the one pictured, sunk in December 1940 by mines near Taranto. And Rover was the only one to survive World War II. It's one of the interesting scenarios is you have some discussions over what exactly sank HMS Rainbow, but we are fairly certain she was sunk by a merchant ship in the Mediterranean. So that is, well, how do I put this? All barring 1 vessel which was lost in a pre-war and 1 vessel which was lost off the coast of Norway, all of the class that were lost of these 19 boats ,12 out of 19 were lost in the Mediterranean. And they are Pacific boats. They're designed for the Far East. They are large vessels designed for the Far East. Oh, Bijan, thank you for the Iron Brew Fund. Thank you very much. Geoguy, don't the Germans have to hide U-boat construction in Russia or something? The spirit? No, they moved their design teams to the Netherlands, but that's about it. Then if a British sub crew could mistaken one of their own by mistake, then Surkov could have fallen victim to the same mistake. Well, you'd have to check the incident logs and various other scenarios. And in the case of this, that was very early in the war, when people were still, how do I put it, changing from peacetime to wartime mentality. What gated only? Who lost more subs in World War II, the USN or the RN? Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't think there's much in it, but they both lost quite a lot. Team Locker. We Finns made some nice boats in the 30s. You did. Right. North Sea and Mediterranean. Well, this is the problem. So the RN's been looking at developing its long-range boats for fighting in the Pacific. And it's been happily pottling on with the H-class and the L-class and Mediterranean North Atlantic. The H-class, though, start to show their age. Because most of the L-class came into service post-World War One, whereas the H-class, some of them were during World War One. So the Royal Navy orders the S-class. And the S-class are these new, large for the Mediterranean, but able to pack a punch boats, and decent size for the Atlantic. And the point is, you're supposed to be able to build more of these than you can the large boats. Thank you, old Richard. Apparently, you've been a member for 7 months, so thank you. Dejan Gavorshik. Was the S-class designed for Mediterranean? Yes. The Royal Navy was designing 2 styles of submarine for the Mediterranean. They were looking at the S-class to be the bigger of submarines that would operate in the Mediterranean, but also would do the Atlantic. So they were honestly... Okay, this starts to sound like the Royal Navy's being very sectional, but they do think about their submarines operating in the other theatres, and they do think about that, but they also consider the theatres so different. It's like if I was designing a submarine for operating in the Mediterranean these days, I'd go for an SSK because it's quieter and everything's in the Mediterranean. If I only want to operate there, then SSK is fine. But if I'm designing a fleet to operate worldwide, I'm probably going for a nuke boat because of the range issues. And if I'm designing if I want to push out my defensive perimeter, aka what Australia is doing now, that's why they're going for a nuke boat. They were going for a diesel boat when they thought they could do it with a diesel boat. But that's what they thought they could build a diesel boat at home. But once they realized they couldn't build a diesel boat to the standard at home, and that it kept more and more work kept being shifted abroad, well, if you're going to build a boat abroad anyway, you might as well build a large chunk of it abroad anyway. You might as well build a nuke boat and have the actual range of defense you need. That's good. Surkov was probably sunk by the US Navy. In real life, IRC, the USN destroyer had an action report of depth charging an unknown submarine in the area that Surkov would probably have been in. No U-boats in that area. Potentially. It is my understanding that the RN had no dedicated ASW exercise into war defending a merchant convoy. Yeah, I'm not sure where you got that from. I can understand there are lots of claims about that, but there are actually convoys which are revolve around protecting convoys. But usually they don't. The dispute tends to arise when you're talking about people going, well, they didn't hire merchant ships for a convoy protection role. They didn't need to. They had their own auxiliary ships, and they used the fleet auxiliary for it. That was it, because it was far cheaper and easier for them to use the RFA. So the RFA's tankers would go, hello, we're merchant convoy. Woohoo! There's actually some exercises I have pictures of. I'm not sure if I have them in this sort of one. But the doctrine and hunting groups trained and doctrine are into war, and I'll explain that once we get onto the sub hunters. We're on the subs at the point. The S-class are pretty much there. They are very cool boats. But again, the Royal Navy is being careful. You have to remember the Royal Navy, when they start the S-class, they're ordering them from 1929 onwards. So these boats are mostly starting to be ordered when it's still very much in the treaty era and they're still very much under the 10-year rule. And they're having to act like it. They also know technology is moving apace. Look at this. This is the boats in 1915. This is what they look like. Look at the boat over there. It's looking smoother. There are some visible changes on the outside. Inside, it's completely different. The advances in battery technology, the advances in valves, the advancement in internal design is tremendous. How done, Freeman? Mm-hmm. There are many options about what could have sunk Surkoff. There's also the option that mechanical issues could have sunk Surkoff. You also have to remember there are lots of reports of things sinking large U-boats, which actually sink whales. Let's give it honest. Is there a book that you can recommend on RN interwar anti-submarine warfare doctrine? Not really. In my experiences in bits, there are lots of bits about, and there is a book which has a good chapter, but it's in one of the Routledge massive books. Well, when I say massive books, I mean one of the Routledge edited books, where everyone's providing a different chapter, and they cost about 90 quid. And so, no, I wouldn't recommend that book, because you're buying, for anti-submarine warfare, you're buying an entire book for one chapter. At the moment, no. If another book comes out in the meantime, I will say yes, but I have a feeling this is going to sound very egotistical, but book number 2 could well fill that brief from me, in terms of having a large section on that sort of doctrine. Patrick Clayton, hi all. I read that submarines were novel during ASW exercises. Not really. Again, this is going to sound... Okay. Right, the issue of exercises, and I will be getting into this in more detail, but if you remember, exercises are not like real war in one major criteria. They're on a time limit. And so the submarines can't necessarily move fast enough to get into a different position. They can't necessarily go and hunt their opponent. Also, they have the same condition as we noticed and I've talked about with air power before in exercises. In exercises, the aircraft always go for the big assets, the battleship, the carrier, and they ignore the destroyers because there's no value for them in killing them in exercise because, well, you won't get any glory for it. It's the same with submarines. They don't want to kill a destroyer, but in wartime, they're more than happy to kill them. Because in wartime, you're just taking out the enemy. You don't really care who it is. In an exercise, well, if you take a risk to try and get to the battleship and you get sunk, okay, you're not really dead. You've just lost the exercise. And woohoo, the ASW guys get to go home and go, we won! But that's what happens. Whereas in wartime, you'd go, I can maybe get in and kill that battleship, or I can kill this destroyer. I can definitely kill the destroyer, and then maybe I get another shot at the battleship, maybe I don't. But I go home and I've sunk a destroyer, and that's worth something. And that's the difference. It's not. And then after the war, you get someone go, oh, they were hobbled, or this, that, as the excuse for these differences. And it's not. it's the different mentality, and it's trying to explain often to officers when they're looking at exercise and information gained from exercises, is that the exercises are the closest we can get to a war, but they aren't a war. They aren't that scenario. Because you know in an exercise, if you risk it, you're not actually going to die unless you have a bad technological failure of your ship. Whereas in war, you actually could die. Now, specials. The RN decided to try and build some fleet submarines, which are also big, large submarines, and basically they have two jobs. They're extra submarines for the Far East, and they're a tester of ideas. But look at that hull design. Does it look like anything which comes later? And they also go for mine-laying submarines, because the Royal Navy, unlike the German Navy, has paid attention to what were the biggest killers of the German Navy in World War I. And they were the mine-laying submarines. They were the mine-laying submarines. They were really, really good. And the Royal Navy lost lots of ships to the mine-laying submarines. So the Royal Navy in the 1930s goes, you know what? We're going to build some mine-laying submarines. And they do quite well, other than one gets by the Germans. Thank God you skipped the M1 class. So far, I'm sort of leaving them to one side. They might be a bonus at the end. Oh, Richard, I'd say the biggest loss of Surkoff was the crew. That's the trouble. You lost a good crew. How did DV-28L? Foreshadowing. Yeah. But guy, did the USN operate any submarine in the Atlantic and in the Mediterranean with the RN during World War II? They didn't have many submarines in the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. They mostly kept theirs in the Pacific. It's easier. Submarines. The more submarines you have operating in a theatre, the more problematic it can get. Even the British submarines in the Pacific, they have their own operating areas. And that's where they operate, and the US Navy subs are in their operating areas because there are complications with it. See, a book about ASW or anything that by you would be great. Thank you. Diego, when did hydrophone detection get superseded by active ASDIC? It's really sort of 1920s, and it's once they get comfortable with it. But I'll be explaining the ASDIC system to you in a second and going through it. That's good. In wartime, they remember that if you die a hero, you're still dead. Yeah. Be awesome. Killing the destroyer that can kill you is a good idea for a submarine. It is in wartime. In peacetime, you were going up on you were in the target area. You were needed a battleship, and you settled for a destroyer. Can't you imagine it? I can. I've sat in the room with people actually saying it. And I'm not talking about people saying it in 1920s, 1930s mode. I'm talking about people who are current serving officers saying that and going, but that's the sensible wartime decision. Oh, yeah, but they missed on the carrier. In wartime, they would go, good on you, you got the destroyer. In peacetime, in an exercise, you wasted a torpedo. Yes, and please note, I have restrained myself from doing that around their heads. GeoGuy001, how accurate is the film Enemy Below? It's got some bits of accuracy in it, and others which are noodles. Hi, Zachary Gherkin. The point about these is these are Royal Navy's experiments. The rivers were supposed to be fleet submarines to keep up with the fleet. So a fleet, wherever it deployed, would have submarines going with it. And again, this is kind of about the War with Japan scenario, because if you think about it, in the Mediterranean, they already had water, they already had free bases. There would be submarines wherever you went. They could do that. The Atlantic? Well, if you're fighting the Americans, then the submarines need to keep up with you to cross it, but that's an unlikely scenario. You're not going to build dedicated submarines for that. The Pacific is the only place you need them. But here's the thing. We've been talking about the OP and R classes, and if we go back and just quickly look at them. So, these enter service roughly between 1926 and 1930. By 1935, the T-boats are being ordered. These are going to be the successors to the OP and R classes. Planning a slight increase in numbers as well, but they're the successors to them. So the OP and R classes have been in service for what? A decade? Less than that? They're already talking about replacing them. HMS Trident here is a good example of the early boats. The RN also had problems in the S-class. They were looking at them, they were enjoying testing them. And they were doing some operations in the Mediterranean, but they just felt they were a bit too big. So they started working on the U-class. Now, the U-class are special. The U-class are really, really cool boats because they are the first class which are overwhelmingly designed with underwater performance in mind. Everything is based on their underwater performance. And people look at me and go, but that's... The RN are doing this in the 1930s? Why? Because these are designed for the Mediterranean. And the honest idea is that they would operate from Gibraltar, from Malta, from Alexandria, and maybe in the UK, from the North Sea. And their purpose would be to spend as much time underwater as possible. They were going to go out as quickly as possible underwater, be ambush predators, and get back. They were supposed to spend minimal amount of time on the surface. Versus the T and the S boats, which were both looking like that transiting on the surface. At least spending some time on the surface, so they had guns and all sorts of things up there. The U-boats are built around underwater actions and underwater responses. And they do so much testing and development with the U-boats that one of the things you see is there is a design change in the T and the S-class boats, where they have... This is the design as they originally built. This is the design once we function in the U-class data. And then people go, well, it's World War II data they're factoring in. You're still going, honestly, by that point, they haven't got much World War II operational data when they're making the changes. It's mostly the data from operating the U and developing and operating the U-class boats to try and make them as streamlined and as quick underwater as possible. These boats will go on to serve with the Soviet Navy, to serve with 8 different navies will operate U-class boats. And they will do a tremendous amount of service. And I would argue that there are boats to this day in service with the Soviet Navy, and was in service with the Russian Navy, and which was developed by the Soviet Navy and now so the Russian Navy, aka the Akulas, which are based off the same principles of these boats. They are underwater assassins. Everything is designed around them getting in as quickly, as quietly as possible and taking the shot. That is their entire raison d'etre. But again, people often sort of look at me and go, well, the Royal Navy doesn't build as many submarines as the Germans do in World War II. They don't. But they don't need to. The Germans are running a major campaign, if we go back to this look, in the middle of the North Atlantic. And also fielding submarines in the Mediterranean and trying to get some... They've got some operating even in the East Indies. And they're trying to operate submarines in the Caribbean, all these things, which have humongous transit times. So to maintain the same equivalent number of boats on station, they need a lot more. Whereas for the Royal Navy, where are their submarines operating off? North coast of Europe? Well, that's not really that far from the UK, is it? That's not going to require a lot of submarines to maintain a presence there. In the Mediterranean, well, you can sort of see the 3 bases as you go through the Mediterranean. You can also work out which base has which boats based on it. Malta tends to be dominated by U-class. And, you sort of go around the Royal Navy's theatre of operations and you can... They keep up equivalently similar levels of operational availability in terms of boats on station as the Germans do, but with a lot less boats because they don't have as big a transit time. They have bases closer. And the U-Class are really, really cool. There is an entire series of videos, for those who haven't seen them, on 10th Flotilla and making Mare Nostrum a hollow-dressed. And I really did like doing that series, and I really do like talking about those boats. That's good. If you sink the carrier, the destroyer doesn't have to escort anymore. It's free to hunt. Probably be interested in inflicting some hydrodynamic vessels are Gen 5. It is arguable that these vessels are Generation 5. That you've had Generation 4, and you've had Generation 3, and the other two generations during World War One. So if you consider the modern aircraft and jet age, and we tend to call those Gen 5, that's what we're dealing with. These are the Gen 5 boats. Was the Triton class or T-class submarine designed for med? Did it have the habit of suddenly dive in the morning? The T-class boats are designed to replace the O, P, and R classes. They didn't have a habit to suddenly dive with no warning, but Thetis does seem to have had a bit of an accident, and that's covered in my book. A bit of an explanation of exactly what happened after that, because the tribals were heavily involved in that incident. T-class are designed to succeed the O, P, and R classes. They're designed for the Far East. Hence, they're designed with a huge forward torpedo firing, because the idea was they would get into position in some of the channels. And then when the Japanese vessels came through, off a full spread of 10 torpedoes, and then get out of there. These are ambush predators. These are for the Far East ambush predators. This is a Pacific and Atlantic to a boat. This is a Mediterranean and North Sea boat. There is a tremendous difference in the size of them as well. Submarine. Just remembering the exact figures, but it changes depending on. I could just open my Norman Freeman book here, but that would be too difficult. The T-class start out at roughly 1,300 tons, 1,300 tons surfaced and 1,560 tons submerged, and the U-class are weighing at well, fully loaded, they weigh in at 630 tons on the surface, which is less than half the weight of the T-class, and submerged they're 730 tons, which is again a lot less than half. So this vessel is half the size of this one. This is your Mediterranean vessel. This is your Pacific vessel. U-class have a range of roughly 4,500 nautical miles at 11 knots on the surface. T-class have a range of 8,000 nautical miles at 10 knots on the surface and carry 131 tons of fuel. Complement of a U-class is between 27 and 31. T-class is 48. The U-class could do 10 knots submerged and a top speed of 11.5 and 11.25 knots on the surface. A T-class, well, its top speed on the surface is 15.5 knots, but its submerged top speed is 9 knots. This is for the Pacific. This is your long-range patrol submarine for the Pacific. For the Far East, South China Sea, that East China Sea, and some parts of the Western Pacific. But this is your Mediterranean vessel, your North Sea vessel. Had some buffering. Yeah, I have. I've warned you about the BT. Hmm. Right. Hopefully, I'm back and all working. He says, hopefully. Ooh. It's just that while it's talking, it's updated me and it says I've had one new member and I've got 19 likes and 51 concurrent viewers. Hello, everyone. Hello. So that is what the Royal Navy's building at the beginning of World War II. They're building the S class, they're building the T class, they're building the U class. And you have each one is useful for sort of two areas. You can say the S class are pretty much the all rounders because they're okay in the Mediterranean, they're okay in the Pacific, and they're probably best for the North Atlantic and the North Sea. You can say the U class are okay for defense in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, because they are, but they are best in the Mediterranean and best in the North Sea. The T class are North Atlantic, North Sea, and the Pacific boats. They're really not good for the Mediterranean. And if you want a further example of that, I can do my list again. Okay, Triton sunk in the Adriatic. Thetis, of course, sank during trials. Recommissioned as Thunderbolt, sunk by Ciacono, the Italian corvette Ciacono, in the Messina Straits, so Mediterranean. Triumph lost to Italian mines, Mediterranean. Triad. I think there's a debate on that side. She was sunk by Triad was sunk by gunfire from the Italian submarine Enrico Tonti in the Gulf of Taranto. Talisman was lost to Italian mines. And Tetrarch was lost to Italian mines. Tempest sunk by an Italian torpedo boat. Fawn sunk by an Italian torpedo boat. Traveller lost to Italian mines. Trooper lost to German mines. Turbulent probably sunk by an Italian torpedo boat. I could carry on, but this is the trouble when you have to use your big boats in your Mediterranean. Because they're what you have available, because you're still building your U-class boats, and you really don't want to use your H-class boats, because they are World War One and their technology is not great. So, this comes to the other side of the coin. The Royal Navy is developing submarines, it's also developing its sub-hunters. But they notice very quickly they need two different types. Okay? Because a sub-hunter which is going to be good for your protecting your convoys is different from protecting your fleet. And believe it or not, that still goes the same to this day. A convoy sub-hunter is going to be a long-range vessel. It's going to have to do a transatlantic crossing at least and take it in its stride. Because it's going to have to be out there, and it can't go fast and blitz it across. It has to be out there day in, day out, reliable in all sorts of weather, working. It needs to be heavily focused on anti-submarine warfare, especially in the 1920s and 30s, because it's unlikely you're going to be dealing with many air attacks, and if you are, then you've got bigger problems. So everything else on its capability list can be rather limited. Then there is the fleet. Well, they're going to need to be high speed because they have to keep up with the fleet. They will also need AA for defense against aircraft and will need firepower for engaging ships. This is an interesting scenario because this can give you a problem. Torpedoes take up space, and they are the best weapon for a small ship to have to take on a larger ship. But if you're orientating your hull and capabilities around torpedo attack, that's different than orientating your capabilities around anti-submarine warfare. For anti-submarine warfare, you want the most maneuverable ship you can possibly have, because submarines often try and do erratic maneuvers to try and throw off an attacking ship, especially with a depth charge pattern. And that's the other thing they're working on. They are working on different forms of depth charges. Ahead throwing systems, i.e. hedgehog-like, etc., and squid, and limbo eventually, take a while, are a long way off, and they're looking at them. They're trying to get to them, but they're a technological jump away. And this is the thing. You need to get ASDIC to the point at which it can provide you the correct data before those things start to become practical. You then need to get systems which can survive being fired, the shock of boom, they're in the air, to hitting the water, and then function in such a way that they work and go off at the correct depth if you're using a depth system. That can be quite a violent experience, and in a depth charge, it works by being quite a large system to protect it. But a forward head firing projectile is not going to be quite the same. So they are looking at various systems, and they start off with the rails, but they're also looking at depth charge throwing systems, and that's to increase and widen the pattern. So you go from having a pattern astern to have a pattern which creates a sort of net around the ship. So if it passes over a ship and the submarine tries to get away, boom, boom, boom. But here's another problem. Do you think you're going to be testing your full-up war-level depth charges versus submarines in peacetime? No, because you'll sink your own subs with your own people aboard, which will look bad in the morning papers. So you've got all sorts of systems going on to try and simulate it to a lesser or greater extent. This is another point where the idea of the submarines being nobbled comes from. Because you have the marshals trying to work out, based sometimes on chucking dice is the system they go with, whether or not their maneuver actually worked to get them away from the destroyer. Well, you're going with the best data you have available, but unless you're actually prepared to kill a crew, and that's the risk you're running, you're doing the best you can as an estimation. And sometimes those estimations are right, sometimes they're wrong. They're not someone setting out going, we will nobble submarines because we don't believe in them. They are, we don't want to kill submarine crews. And if you think about the difficulty we have today of including submarines in operations and exercises and working out whether they've been killed or not, and that's with the technology we have today. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Yes, working now. That's good. P. Dawson, the Italians had some tiny subs. They managed to... Those were human torpedoes, which are a slightly different thing, but they're a clever idea. Patrick Clayton, did the Allies use submarine supply ships in the Pacific Lake War? Nope. The Allies didn't need to. They had surface ships. Let's be honest, which is going to deliver a lot more supplies in one go? A surface ship. So you just escort it. You have the Fletcher swarm for a reason. Maybe 35 minutes. Sorry if you've already talked about it. Was there any difference in installation between subs intended for cold waters and warm waters? Not really. Not really any installation difference. More a case of it's the size for operating, which does tend to have an impact. So let's talk about Aztec. Patrick Lane, we use subs to supply mortar. In very specified occasions, not in the Pacific, but in the Mediterranean, yes, we did use some submarines did do some supply runs for mortar, but it was, again, bringing in high value, low volume equipment systems when they need to be. If the RN could have gotten all 42 V class, 9 U class, and 69 T class and 62 S class, would their enemies be in trouble? Depends where they get them. If they get them by 1945, they're already gone. If they have them suddenly appear in 1939, the Royal Navy's going, "Whoopie-dee!" Then the Italians are probably crying a bit because the U-class, if the Royal Navy is able to deploy 49 U-class straight to the Mediterranean, then there probably aren't many Italian submarines, Italian ships left after they finished. Would it be accurate to say contemporary navies ignore or no longer believe the concept of convoy protection? I would say current modern navies don't have much of a choice. Again, they do believe in convoy protection, and the Royal Navy has actually most recently done some convoying, and they did it during the Somalian pirates incident as well. Multinational navies did it. But the point is, you need a lot of ships for convoying. To do a convoy protection, you need a lot of ships, and does any navy have a surplus of ships at the moment? No. Alex, Hedgehog does not use a depth-sensitive pistol. It's contact only. True. The reason was because they couldn't get a depth-sensitive pistol working for it in time, so they ended up going with the contact one. They tried to. They were trying to develop a system which had the depth one. That's one. I thought my Admiral BT joke would at least get a smile from Dr. Clarke. It did. It did, trust me. That was good. There must be something wrong with our internet today. Patrick Lang, the Bond boys were the elite of the Air Force. Were submariners seen as second class? Nope. They're their own elite. The Royal Navy is quite good at maintaining different groups thinking of themselves as an elite. The submariners are an elite, and we'll be getting onto who they are in a bit. That does not sound right. They tried to develop something clever, and then they settled for something less capable. It often happens. The ASDIC, or basically known as sonar, is a transmitter receiver sending out a highly directional sound wave through the water. If the sound wave struck a submerged object, it was reflected back and picked up by the receiver. The length of time from transmission until the echo was received was used to measure the range, which tend to be displayed as a flickering light on a range scale. The transmitter was had its head mounted so that it could be directed almost like a searchlight. The bearing of the target could be read from the compass receiver. So that would give you bearing and range. It wouldn't give you depth as it was originally designed. The transmitter head, the bit that produces sound, extends beneath the ship, and to try and protect it from noise of water rushing past, it was encased in a large metal dome, which itself was filled with water. This stopped it being affected so much when water was rushing past at moderate speed. The water in the dome was stationary, and so that acted almost like a bumper to dissipate the rushing noises. Noise level, therefore, remains relatively low at moderate speeds, but anything above 18 knots resulted in too much noise and good contacts becoming very difficult to find. So 18 knots is your minimum, well, your maximum. Once you get above 18 knots, you stop having operating capability in terms of it. So if your force is transiting faster than 18 knots, you're in trouble. You can't hear what's going on. And if you think about some of the operations in World War II, where the Royal Navy ships are dashing around, and people go, oh, they have all these destroyers around them. Why are they here? Why don't they detect them? Why? Well, the Royal Navy knew that ASDIC had problems above 18 knots. But at certain points, urgency of operation means you're going as fast as you can go, and you hope that by zigzagging and by going as fast as you go, you make a torpedo attack very difficult. So you ward off a submarine in that respect. The same, however, could also be affected by bad weather, when ships are rolling, pitching and heaving, and all the other fun. Now, the actual search pattern for ASDIC would tend to go through a 45 degrees on each side of the base course of the vessel. And it has to be quite slowly turned, because you have to sort of turn it and then hold it to try and listen in for a signal and get it back, because the sound is not necessarily as fast as you might hope or think it is going through and water and returning. And if you have the head moving too quickly, then you get confused signals returning, but also you tend to get other issues, and you get a lot more fulsome issues. Now, the trouble is also that echoes can bounce back from not only submarines, but also whales, schools of fish, vertical sea currents, and other ships' wakes. And this is where having experienced operators really matters, because a veteran operator is better at figuring out bad signals and hunting down the intended target than an inexperienced one. And this was also, of course, the issue of the thermal layers, which were things which were not as well understood when ASDIC was starting. So when we're starting in 1920, this is the basic beginning point. Now, they start to get better and start to learn more, but it takes time. You come with ASDIC, that's great. What's it going to impact? How's the operations? And then how the submarines are going to respond to it. And before we get into it too much, you have to also then go back to where is the Royal Navy conducting the majority of their exercises. They're conducting the vast majority of their interwar exercises in the Mediterranean. Why? Because it's got fairly constant weather, so it's fairly reliable for having an exercise. It's also far enough away from the government you can have an exercise in peace. And it's a good way of the largest near-home threat for most of the 1920s and 30s, the Italians, because let's be honest, the Italian Navy is always far more capable than the German Navy in the 1930s, and they're always considered a more of a problematic threat because of where exactly they are in terms of their geography, in terms of British forces being able to reach the Far East, so they need to be all back or Europe. They go and exercise nearby them to remind them exactly how powerful the Royal Navy is. Gives them a good reason for gathering a large force in the Mediterranean. But the Mediterranean, in terms of waterways, is also how do I put this? The Mediterranean doesn't have as many thermal layers or as differences and major currents as areas of the North Atlantic do and areas of even the Pacific do. The Mediterranean is unsurprisingly quite calm in comparison. I'm not saying it doesn't have those things, it does. It's just there aren't quite as many, and the water tends to be a lot clearer, and this all leads to false positives. And let's check the questions quickly. Now I've got through that. Ooh. Hello, Eric Gusala. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hugo, there was limited combat protection in the Persian Gulf for tankers in the 1820s. Yeah. That's good. The other thing about convoys in Monday is that you need to convince ship owners to take on the cost of waiting for the convoy to form. Most figure paying a ransom is cheaper. Yeah. If they get taken. Nice one. The charge on a hedge code is really only effective when detonating a contact. There'd be no benefit to having a depth pistol instead of a contact. Again, Melanie, explain. If I explain it, how do I put this? The first system that they're really working on in concept looks far more like the squid than the hedgehog. But the technology isn't available, so then they sort of transition and develop the hedgehog. But if you look at the concept of operations they are conceiving of in the late 1930s, and if you look down this, you sort of see, oh, we started to get something quite reliable here. Once you got to the Type 122, which really comes about in about 1932, 33. And that's where they start to really go, ooh, we can do this and we can develop this. And then Type 123 comes in, then the Type 124, which is a very much improved version of the 122 in that technology. And once they start to get more reliable ASDIC and more useful ASDIC, they start to want to think about using the data. And it's the Type 144, which is developed in 1941, tested in 1941, which is the first set which is specifically intended for operating a head-throwing weapons like Hedgehog. But they've been working on that idea for about 3-4 years at this point. They've been trying to work out a head-throwing system because it's very quickly apparent in exercises that the submarine, the trouble of the attacking ship loses contact with the submarine when it's on a depth charge run. So that means you need at least 2 escorts to be engaging a single submarine. The Royal Navy's not stupid. The Royal Navy, and this is in the text and escort exercises, the Royal Navy starts going, well, hang on, how can we change the system so that with ASDIC, we can attack a submarine with a single escort and have a good chance of success? And a forward-throwing system is what they start to look into. And they start work on this, but the thing is, this has been worked out. Because, again, it's actually with the convoys in mind is what they're really, really stressing this. Because they presume the fleet's always going to have enough destroyers that, yeah, there's 4 submarines out there, then 10 submarines out there, we'll have 20 destroyers, they can go off and prosecute them. But convoys, well, they're probably going to have an escort of, 12 or so vessels, maximum? Trawlers, sloops, mostly? Okay, they'll need to have, 6, 7 submarines, and suddenly you've lost your escort, and then they've got to catch up with them, which will take time. Okay. That becomes a problem. So this is what the Royal Navy's thinking. They are working on their systems before they come in. Again, one of the issues that I find really annoying in some of the pop history and some of the movies, etc., media, is you think these technologies always represent as if they suddenly appear in World War II, and most of them have been under development for a while. It's like the submarines. They were developing submarines all the way through the 20s and 30s, and each new generation was an improvement on the past. It's iterative. It's the same with ASDIC, and it's the same with the weapon systems they're developing to fight the submarines. Basically, and Alex, and if you suddenly have 24 times 15 kilogram charges going off at depth, hell, even one of those is going to destroy your fix on target. Why would you want them to detonate on depth versus contact? Principally because they weren't sure how accurate they were going to be. Again, think about it in terms of we are basically we know how accurate a ASDIC do we have. Is this giving us a very good localized area, or are, like the earlier ASDICs, it giving us more of a area, in which case we could aim a contact and we could miss it. So if we have them all going off, well, it wasn't going to be 24. It was supposed to be, I always forget what the earlier system was looking at, but some of the earlier papers. It's a fun scenario. It's one of those things. They are trying to develop it. They have ideas. Not always the ideas work out and logical to us looking back, but the ideas made sense to them at the time because it's based on the technology they have at the time, the quality of information and the quality of sensory they have at the time. And again, as with submarines, they're doing an iterative approach with the anti-submarine warfare escorts. Sloops. These are your long-range convoy escorts. This is what they're designed for. They have a great system in the treaty. They're allowed to build them. Woohoo! That's brilliant. They've got to be less than 2,000 tons. That's fine. They've got to be a maximum speed of 20 knots. That's fine. And let's be honest, ASDIC stops working over 18 knots. You don't want these things to go much faster. They're not allowed torpedoes. That's annoying, but well, they can deal with that. They're allowed a certain number of guns. I think it's... Well, it depends. If they're bigger than... they're not supposed to have guns, a certain number of more than sort of 5-inch guns or something like that. And it's... The thing is, you can design a perfectly good convoy escort with a reasonable amount of anti-air defense and a reasonable amount of anti-surface in terms of vessels, small unit defense, i.e. torpedo boats, and a very good anti-submarine warfare capability for the time. You can design that on 2,000 tons and produce a long-range escort. And that's what they're doing. Yeah. Trying to use a squid analog in the early 30s would be a nightmare. Yep. Hence, they come up with the hedgehog. They try to go for the advanced thing, and then they count the hedgehog, and then they return to the squid, and they actually, with the early 1940s tech, managed to get it working. Gosberg, and the Adriatic and the Med sometimes get crystal clear down to 50 meters and then have fluorescent algae blooms. Yeah, that happened to, I think, a German U-boat which was trying to get into the Mediterranean, and the algae bloomed around it, and it was spotted trying to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. 96everyone. With a fleet of 42 Vs, 49 Us, 69 Ts, and 62 S-class attack submarines, the German naval supply lines are pretty much toast. Yeah, so the Italian ones. Basically, the North African campaign would be very, very different. There would be a case of, we have no supplies, we surrender. Joy of forward throwing is make sure you are not overhead when they go off. That is the other problem. No, sorry, plenty of destroyers. All you need, yeah. They don't plan on the 99-year lease store. Cameron, needing the 2 escorts to attack a submarine was the premise behind the book The Enemy Below, written by an Iron captain. Whole premise was, what happens in a one-on-one? Yeah, it becomes not good. Vision, 4 times 6 inch. Limit was 4 times 6 inch. Thank you. I don't remember where I got 5 inch from. Just got Admiral BT at it again briefly. Oh, that's annoying. Mm-hmm. That's good. Actually, the problem they had initially with some of the testing with the 15-kilogram ones, hedgehog ones, if they got the range wrong, and they were too close when they went over them, was they actually would damage the ASDIC. So these are really the vessels which the Royal Navy's trying to develop for anti-submarine warfare. There's one problem, though, and the reason why you end up getting a lot of corvettes produced in World War II rather than a lot of sloops is because these use turbines, which can also be used for destroyers. And let's be honest, which would you rather stick a turbine in? A sloop or a destroyer? You probably go for a destroyer, because that will give you an anti-surface capability and able to defend your fleet, or you can use it for a convoy escort if you want to. You know, they're available. The point is, though, the Black Swans class, the Egret class, the Hunt class, the escort destroyers are all developed off these vessels, and the outfitting and the weaponry that they would put on the Flower class corvettes, they put on various frigate classes, all owe their origins to the experimentations done with sloops, which are in many ways the early, more successful version of what the LCS was planned for, because they were supposed to be able to do mine warfare, which they did. The Halcyon class does very well, and anti-submarine warfare. Telling us, diesel sloops, there weren't that many. They decided early on that diesel might not be the best idea for an anti-submarine warfare vessel. And Rajpal, where does the Grimsby class fall in this categorization of sloop as far as strategic thinking goes? The Grimsby class are pretty darn cool. And I've done a bit more about them in my video about the small ships in the interwar period. But the Grimsby class come after the Shoreham class. So if you consider the Shoreham class are these ones, and before the Bittons, and they are, how do I put this? They're supposed to be anti-submarine warfare, but really they're the RN's attempt to building an anti-submarine warfare vessel for the Indian Ocean and the Far East. They are designed to be operating in that region. And again, they use Parsons-geared steam turbines and Admiralty free-drum water boilers. They have 2,000 shaft horsepower, a top speed of 16.5 knots, so well under the 20-knot range. But they could do a very reasonable distance. They'd carry two 4.7-inch guns, a quick-firing 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, 4 3-pounder guns, and up to 90 depth charges. So that tells you exactly what the Grimsby class are for. They were also specifically designed so that they could be built in Australia, in the Cockatoo Island dockyard, but also there was plans to eventually use them to have them built in India as well, and build ships in India, because they thought sloops were the perfect thing to start off shipbuilding yards. And they wanted to do that. One of the things that's often misunderstood about the Royal Navy and the British in the late 1930s, early 1940s, they wanted to democratize and spread out the construction of shipyards and the construction of ships around the empire, because that would give them strategic security. They saw the bombing fleets being built in Europe, and they didn't want to be dependent upon British yards for their construction and repair of ships. If they'd managed to get the Canadians to have a bigger yard facility and build more yard facilities in the 1920s and 30s, or if they'd managed to get if the Canadians had actually procured those battleships which they'd considered procuring in pre-World War One, then, and if the Australians had kept their battle cruisers and had kept the battle cruisers, maybe they got HMS Tiger, etc., they could well have had fairly good anchors at various parts of their empire that they could have relied on to repair and recondition ships if they needed to, so that they would, if you bombed, I know, Newcastle on time. That's problematic, but don't worry, the battleships are all being repaired elsewhere. And the easy way to start off is to start with construction. And the lowest level of warship, which is built to warship standards, is a sloop. And that's what these are built for. That's good. When you say damage the Aztec, was it that the noise shockwave damaged the listening equipment, or did it damage the physical equipment in the differentiation? Makes sense. It tended to damage the listening equipment in terms of it could actually. They found that some of them managed to, because the metal of the dome is not particularly thick, because it's supposed to allow sound through and etc. and has water in it. They damaged that, and then they had rushing water sound noises. Henry, why wouldn't diesels be good for ASW? They tend to be noisier. And their harmonic range, especially of the engines, tends to cause vibrations, which has an impact at time. Remember, they're still developing things like rafting machinery. So gas turbines and turbine power tends to create a different harmonic frequency and vibration in the ship's hull than a diesel engine does. I'd be curious to see some period reports on the 14 to 16 kilogram hedgehog causing damaging Aztec. Also, I'm sticking with you would not want depth pictures on such a charge. It's literally of no use when not in contact. And I said I agree with you, but I didn't say that Melanie, you are having this debate with me, and I'm merely the historian reporting what other people were trying. I am sure this might. I don't think, knowing you, this comes as a shock to you when I say, is it the first time someone for a government defense project has tried to go for the all singing, all dancing, unnecessary bells and whistles option for designing a system rather than what makes sense necessarily when you think about it logically? You know, it's the case of the earlier versions that they were looking at. Some of them have all sorts of bells and whistles tucked into. And I remember reading the book which mentioned this, the chapter which didn't mention this, and thinking, yeah, that must be silly. And going and reading some of the archive. I haven't read all the archive sources, and that's actually one of the videos which is coming up. Is going to be on how to approach finding archive sources. And going, oh my god, you undersold this. And what is the thing is, there's a lot of data and a lot of papers which aren't visible, aren't left in there, aren't available for you to find, because the usual archive thing where they don't keep everything. And you're just going, if this is what this is saying, goodness knows what's on the stuff which isn't written down. Well, it isn't available to be read. Vision. USN's 1930s Erie class gunboat, built to the Maxwell sloop standard from the London Treaty. USN only built 2 ships. Henry Nonsense, hello. What do you think of the Think Tomorrow's Cocker book, Royal Navy Submarines 1901 to 2008? It's a nice introduction to Royal Navy submarines. I don't agree with everything in it, but there again, I'm another naval historian. I love most of my colleagues. I read Norman Freeman books all the time. I have great friendships with many colleagues, and Andrew Lambert is pretty much the closest thing, as far as I'm concerned, to the prophet who walks amongst us in terms of naval history. Please note that's in terms of naval history, But that doesn't mean I agree with everything all of them they all say all the time. No, because we have different interpretations. We're not the same human being. Death Squad. If 24 15 kilogram depth charges explode around something, you can track it by. No. Hedgehog contact depth fuse. Yeah, but if a dozen or so 30 to 40 kilogram charges go around your sub, that might be a significant emotional event. It would be. Rapid Razak, finally finished Singtao. Sloop or Corvette? There's always an interesting. If it's built to commercial standards, it's usually a Corvette. And with a triple expansion engine. If it's built with a turbine to naval standards, it's usually a sloop. Dan Freeman, potentially silly question. I still get confused by terminology merchant standards and naval standards. Basically, in the 1920s and 30s and World War II, as it accounts, it basically it means the thickness of steel and the subdivisions you're building into it. Modern days, it includes rafting of certain rafting of engines and all sorts of things like that. Constance, why was it so hard to develop large shipyards overseas? I know they tried for a while, lacking sufficient skilled labor, too much capital required. Both, mixture of both, and political will. You need a lot of consistent funding long term to get a shipyard working. Alright, so Dan, I find it funny. You and the other doctor have trouble convincing people you are neither infants nor neither infants or ancient. Right. Patrick, how long will it take the Aussies to build a nuclear submarine today? 20 years minimum? I have a feeling that a large chunk of their submarines are going to be built in foreign yards, or rather, the large chunk I'm talking about is the reactor plant. The rest will probably be built in Australia. It'll be interesting. It could well be, I reckon it could well be a decade. Nice one, Alex. I may, partially, if not fully, have been replying to a part of the conversation from others in chat. I thought you might be. But by talking back with you, Melanie, it tends to answer other people's questions because you ask the questions which sometimes other people merely voice in their heads. And that's manageable. A number of overseas bases of the RN, Bombay included, did see development of fairly extensive maintenance facilities in the 18th century and 20th centuries. Shipbuilding facilities, though, seem to have been slower to come up, maybe due to requiring a large capital, no number of orders. Pretty much, but also the fact is the role of those maintenance facilities were in the purview of the Royal Navy, so they could do it themselves. The rest requires local politics and local economic and local merchant classes to get involved and do it and put the money in and keep it working. And it requires a lot. Basically, the Royal Navy could only do so much. Now, Sigrun, how many H-class submarines were in service in World War II? Well, I know H-49 was sunk by German surface units in 1940. Many of them did serve till 1945. So, mostly Group 3, the vessels, I think, were the ones which did it. Some H-31 was mined and sunk in 1945. Yeah, a fair number. I'd say roughly. Say roughly 16. But I wouldn't want to be 100% sure on that on the H class because there's a debate on it. Right, so trawlers. In 1935, the Royal Navy goes, right then, we need to have vessels we can produce in huge numbers quickly. Okay, so they try out a sloop and they try out a trawler design. Kingfisher class, they build 9 of them. Trawlers, they build a couple and a couple and a couple of. And basically, they're building them and seeing if there is enough difference in capabilities to justify building an entire fleet of these versus an entire fleet of those. They work out very quickly they can build these in lots of yards. And they will end up building hundreds of these. This goes back to the point about convoy escorts. These will do coastal convoys very nicely, thank you very much. And that's what they're for. These are for the coastal convoys, these are for minesweeping, these are for boom defense vessels, all those sort of duties. That's what they will do very nicely. This is a full-on warship design for it, and they build 9 of these, which are lovely. But they're pretty much a coastal waters, coastal convoys, submarine hunting machine. And the Kingfisher class are good at that. But the thing is, that's a 100% solution for that role. This is a more of a 70% solution for that role. But I can crank out these by the dozen from dozens of yards. There are, well, I think in long patrol, I say there are pretty much hundreds of yards which can build a trawler in the United Kingdom. And I'm not far off it. I've been, I'm fairly sure I'm not far off it. There are hundreds of yards in the British, in the Empire, in the Britain, across the world, which can build a trawler. All the Royal Navy has to make sure is they get their World War One issue 4-inch or 3-inch gun, and their attachment of a load of depth charges. Maybe some machine guns if we're being really generous. Otherwise, it's a trawler. And it's usually quite quiet because it has to be quite quiet so it doesn't scare off the fish. And for the submarines, these represent a real problem. Because just as in exercises in peacetime, the destroyer becomes too small target. If I'm wasting a torpedo taking out a trawler, that's a torpedo I don't have for a merchant ship. But I've got to take it out. And the trouble is, it's quite shallow draft, and it's quite small. And yes, it doesn't chug along that quickly, but it's also quite nimble. And the number one thing trawlers used to do when they saw a torpedo coming towards them, turn towards it. The bow wave would, underwater being pushed out of the way by the trawler, would often be enough to alter the course of the torpedo if it was actually coming head on to them, to actually push it off. Brilliant. When did heavy lifting for SW shift from submarines and helicopters? Shift to submarines and helicopters rather than shipboard sensors and weapons. I would say that usually that happens. That's more of a very, very modern thing. I would say if you're looking during the Cold War, we're still talking shipboard sensors, and I would even say to this day that in reality, whilst we like to talk about submarines being used for anti-submarine warfare and helicopters, your shipboard sensors are still quite a big part of it, and depends also on the operational skills. Because if you're talking about some of the some navies, the processing power and all the data goes back to the ship, which does all the processing, and the helicopter is literally a sensor and weapons platform. Whereas if you're talking about the Royal Navy or the Merlins, they're a mixture. They have the processing power on the helicopter, but they can also relay that data back to the frigate or destroyer or whatever's doing it and back it up. So that's good. Also, industrialization of colonies is a good way of boosting the support of the independence movements in these colonies, unless most citizens feel affinity to imperial power. True, but you already had Britain on the progress of a Commonwealth standard. You have to remember the Commonwealth plan is, as I've said before, is something which Britain's by now been on the stick of for by the time we're talking about 1930s. I would say Britain's been in the Commonwealth doctrine of how to manage empire and how to transition empire to a Commonwealth for about 40 years. Okay, it's had times when it's waxed and waned in terms of strength, but it's been there. Britain doesn't. You have to remember, Britain doesn't treat an empire as a permanent thing it's going to have. It's already made the dominions. It's already working on the transition to the Commonwealth. It has a different philosophy in that regards. I'm not saying it's a nice empire, or that it's sort of benevolent that way. I'd just say that their view is it's better to give the potential independence movements an idea that there is a transition and all these things will happen, as it stops them having to fight a war, and it also builds up a relationship which will be longer lasting into peacetime. And that's the British way. And you can say that to an extent is if you look at the success, the fact that the Commonwealth is still around to this day, and my own dealings with the Commonwealth as an organisation and the people I met through it in terms of from other countries and the Commonwealth, I would say it has been a very, very successful political enterprise on that front. That's sort of, ooh, that makes good lecture talk technique. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Manly. Don Giovanni, did the UK have anything like SOSUS in place like Gibraltar, or was that infeasible technology at the time? They had things which were looking towards becoming hydrophonic, which were they had hydrophones in place on the seabed in various places, but they were nowhere near what SOSUS is in terms of capability. I've heard of them. I imagine USN allowed the RN access to the data from the SOSUS, if not the hardware software. They basically both sort of set it up. If you're talking about the Atlantic one. Aaron Paul, the RN has 9 H-class submarines in service in 1949. 2 of those lost, and others are scrapped before 1945 and 40 and 45. The 6th group, 2 boats in Chilean service, got scrapped in 1945 to 47. Cool. And the reason I said I thought it was 16 was they had some which are listed as training subs, which I think got used, but maybe not. I don't know. There is my notes on the H class are kind of muddy. As I said before, submarines are not my area of specialty. I tend to focus on the things which hunt the submarines. Vision, would today some armed trawlers corvettes be useful to fire as small and cheap patrol vessels? Potentially, but again, you'd have to crew them, and what's that money coming from? The point is, yes, the RN would have loved to build more of these in peacetime. They would have loved to build more of these in peacetime, but they only have such a certain amount of budget, and they have to build what they can build out of that budget. And the thing is, these can be built relatively quickly. So you don't build these until you pretty much sure you're going to need them quite soon. Whereas the cruisers, the aircraft carriers, the larger fleet destroyers, the battleships, they take longer. Alex, could you explain a talking answering with what I was saying and why thinking a thing for constant players? Basic concentration, basically the standard. It's a technique which I first had experience of watching Glenn Richardson do when I was in first year of university. Is if there is a student asking questions, or someone in this case in the chat asking questions, and even if they're having a conversation with other people, but they're asking relevant questions which are relevant to the topic, they're probably things which other people in the class are wanting to discuss. Especially this is the case in a seminar. So basically, pick them up and start turning the conversation. So it's between you, it's sort of you're having conversation with the rest of the class, but focusing on that student's question or that person in the chat's question. And that way, you are probably answering what most of the class is already thinking and asking. Because usually, in any class, you will have at maximum 1 in 10 of the students will actually be comfortable sticking their head above the parapet and actually talking. And you can very quickly pick up on the class, watch what their level is, and you very quickly work out which of the students is pretty much most representative of the ones who actually speak, are probably most representative of the class as a whole. And whilst you still answer the questions and try and answer questions from all the students, when that particular student or person in the chat, and I have about 3 in this chat who I always look for, Melanie is actually one of them, obviously. I know when they are asking a question, then there's probably a large number of people who are thinking that question. And that seems to be about the level, because when I read the comments and I check feedback and I look at the discussions of people on the videos, and therefore I pick up on that question and make sure I answer it, because I'm probably needing to explain the point more fully because that person is kindly selling it. So it's a basic case of listening to the audience, listening to your class, and working through and working out your students, which are the ones, or the listener audience, which are the ones are going to be asking representative questions. Sometimes all ASW trawlers, gotta love and hate them if you're a submarine sim fan. Yeah. Hello, Thomas. Nice occurring. So if the RN got 69T class and 62S class, that would 46 Amphion class enough to replace the surviving subs? Possibly. Patrick Clayton, what about the Canadians? Where did their vast armada get built? Mostly in Canada. Referee, the wife hasn't complained about your voice, but we are in a battle to see which phone can be louder. Go on, Mrs. Razorback, you can win. They already had hydrophones, non-electrical ones, near the end of World War I. By the late 1920s and 1930s, bringing the first electronic hydrophones, which are useful, unlike the mechanical predecessors, into service. And Knights of Clarke, you are now jumping into post-World War II, and we're still trying to deal with World War II and the build up the interwar years and building up for it. So, so I'm going to ignore that question for a moment. Right then. So, the Royal Navy goes for something bigger, but there are variations in this. You want the Hunt class, which you want a slightly faster but still long-range escort for the convoys, because whilst the majority of your convoy escorts are going to be sloops or corvettes, you need something which can hunt down and kill targets when you detect them further away, and then catch up with the convoy moving. So you want the vessels which can provide the majority of escort, that's good. But if you spot a submarine further away, you don't want to let it go by. You want to be able to take it out. You also want to form attack groups with your carriers for the middle of the ocean. And the idea was they would largely be formed of these vessels with some of these fleet destroyers. Now, fleet destroyers, the difference between them and escort destroyers is they tend to be slightly faster, slightly bigger, and have torpedoes. These are more likely to have head throwing systems fitted. These are when they come into service. These are more likely to have torpedoes. And then you have on top of that, you have the tribals, which already also carry a whole plethora of depth charges. And their job is to pretty much act as the last line of defense in any scenario against anything. So that includes submarines, and they do have ASDIC. So all of these have ASDIC. But let's be honest, the one which is most operated around using it is this vessel, because these two are designed around their this one's designed around the torpedoes, and this one's designed around their guns. This one is designed for high-speed torpedo attacks, and the hull and machinery are structured around that. This one is designed for fighting enemy destroyers and possibly dueling with enemy cruisers and doing night strike attacks. For these ones, anti-submarine warfare is a key mission they have to do, but it's on the secondary list of missions. They're not their primary mission. For the Hunt class, their anti-submarine warfare is their primary mission. And the difference from sloops, again, is that they can do the higher speed. This is why, despite being built on a sloop hull, and this is one of the reasons why I often say, well, sloops are supposed to be designed for less than 20 knots, but yeah... This is a sloop designed hull which does more than 20 knots by a long way. Jeremiah, sorry for being quiet. I don't usually think about this stuff myself. I kind of like the big ships, but I understand why these are needed now. Basically, it's about numbers. Anti-submarine warfare is a number game because your opponent's an ambush predator. So if you think about it from another perspective, your smaller ships are... Well, let's put it this way. Let's say you're doing jungle operations. You can proceed in single file, and you can do a covert operation like that, and often you proceed on a trail and you're doing that. But if you are jungle forest operations in Europe in Napoleonic era, you would often have riflemen and other light infantry skirmish in front of your main units in a long laid out line to try and spot enemy hiding to ambush you. This is what the smaller ships are for. They are to ambush the ambushers, or at least trigger the ambush, so that your other ships can engage. That's good. I know that a submarine getting trapped in a net of a small trawler can drag the trawler under. Is the same true of our big factory trawlers, or could those go fishing for subs? That's going to be a fight and probably going to end up with broken nets. I don't know. Depends on the size of the submarine involved, probably, and the trawler. That's claim. As I understand it, pre-war we could order all the trawlers to be built to military standard, but we just didn't do it. Why not? Again, this is something which comes up quite a lot, and if you want a good book about this and the trawlers, Steve Dunn's book, The British Naval Trawlers and Drifters in Two World Wars, is excellent for starters, and also will explain that the reason why the Royal Navy doesn't is because they can, but they can only order it under the British government rules if they're prepared to pay some money for it. And that would come from the Admiralty budget. So the Admiralty would have to pay for it. What they do themselves is they build their own they build Bassets and a few other trawlers themselves. They build their own trawlers, which they operate with naval crews for various, and they use various reasons of justification. But a general program of paying trawler operators and giving them money for it, they didn't want to do because they could see that as becoming very expensive. Constant never being sorry for being confused or unsure about something. What sort of no? That's the first rule of this channel. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Some people try to be asked a stupid question, but there isn't such a thing as a stupid question. No, in my classes. Quickest way to get thrown out of one of my seminars is to start laughing at someone and go, "Oh, that's a stupid question." Geo Guy 001, what modern ASW weapons equipment could be put in a merchant hull? Pretty much everything. You can put it in there. Whether it's going to work or not, and whether it's going to be useful is a completely different matter, but you can put it in there. Merry Christmas, Carl. Hunt can handle a surface U-boat, and they had 3 total upgrades to class. Yeah, Hunt class are very, very good vessels. Admit it, the tribals were more than just anti-destroying. They chiefly thought of themselves as anti-everything up to battleships. To be fair, they took on battleships as well. HMS Somali took on, I think it was Vittorio Veneto or Andrea Doria. Vittorio Veneto solo. I get into that book in myself. She basically goes, "There's an enemy battleship charging. I'm going to pump out so much smoke that the other 2 destroyers supposed to be assisting me can't see, and I'm going to charge." And they run out of shells at one point, and so are firing baked bean cans from the guns. It works. The Italians aren't quite sure what they're getting hit with. Apparently, it fitted and they fired. But I have one story. I don't know if I put that particular. I only found one account of that, and I wasn't quite sure about it, so I don't think I put that in my book. But yeah, that was one of the stories. They ran out of shells and were firing baked bean cans to maintain the deterrence factor. Skirmish line protecting the line infantry and optionally reinforce the latter. The resistance encountered is too heavy. The French dropped rifles for this reason during the Napoleonic era. Andrew Rapol, slightly tangential question. Was the anti-mandate London Naval Treaty mandate limit of 1,850 tons of destroyers a serious constraint for the Trub class? Do you think a second set of tubes would have made them far more deadly? It was a constraint, but as I discuss in my book, I have an actual table of it. Let me see if I can find it. Remembering which page the table then. Yes. Their normal displacement. Not a single one of the destroyers actually were 1,850 tons. And I use the phrase normal displacement rather than standard for a very simple reason. It becomes kind of interesting. Most range between roughly 1,908. Well, there's one for 1,964, which is Matabale. And a 3D rocks in at 2,244 tons. You can have variations on it. They are interesting vessels. But yes, it is a limitation. I have a feeling if they would have been far closer to the size of the Daring class post-war if Henderson had his way and had no London Naval Treaty to deal with. Matigran, if somehow the Royal Navy got 22 Astute class SSNs, then how might they be used? Currently, at the moment, there would be some very worried Russians and probably some Chinese going, what? Because if you have 22, you probably end up with the Royal Navy. Well, let's put it this way: if you've got 22 submarines and you operate, let's say, in thirds, that means you have 7 boats forward on operations, 7 in transit, and various other things around, and 7 in various forms of refit, 7 or 8, 8 in transit. Well, 7 in transit, 7 in refit, and an extra boat. 22 submarines is a lot of submarines. It's a lot of capability. Mm-hmm. Patrick Clayton, was Nelson killed by a rifle and musket? I'm reckoning probably a musket, but who knows? Cal Harmon, by the way, Doctor. I'm sad to hear that, Carl. I'm sad to hear that one. Third squad, Italians having baked beans splattered across the shells were bad, but this is a war crime against how they put such food on that shit. I can just, yeah. One of my friends, when I said, "Well, it's beans in a tomato sauce," their exact expression was, "That is not a tomato sauce." It works. Seamush, considering how busy they were with air supply, it's weird they would bother dropping knives. That's Thomas in response to Thomas Van der Veld's. Love the story about tins. Luftwaffe once bombed Soviet docks in Stalingrad with buckets filled with plowshares and knives. Since after 100 days of maximum effort, they had no bombs left. Hey, baked beans are a deterrent in any form, canned or cooked or eaten. Drifters, can you look up Halpern's Battle of Taranto Straits, page 22, the crew of remembrance? I know it's not brochures. I will do at some point. I don't think the beans were quite incendiary. Anyway, Richard, I never thought of Heinz beans as a defense contractor. They are apparently. Anyway, this is the other problem you have with exercises. In exercises, the Royal Navy sometimes does artificial things, and they manage to get a whole fleet together, which they're very happy to do, but reflects the ability of if they were focusing on a single theatre versus a multi-theatre war. And the problem is, look at this. It's in the Mediterranean. You've got three big carriers together. They're in the Mediterranean. They're going to be part of the exercise. This exercise this particular year involved four carriers, which out of six is a fairly decent, significant number to be sent. In one year, I think they peaked with five carriers involved in the exercises out of six. And eventually, they have seven. They have Ark Royal involved, but I think she only gets to being part of one exercise, and they don't bring a full carriers on that point. But the point is, they are being used as part of this exercise. They are part of that, and their aircraft are part of the anti-submarine warfare they're out scouting. But again, which is the cool thing to sink? It's that thing over the corner. It might be an R class, but it's a battleship. It's a cool thing to sink. It's also, where are the carriers? The carriers are probably going to be off on their own somewhere with a small escort. How many submarines are going to be part of the exercise? What are the submarines going to be doing? Are they going to be, if they surface, the submarine, the aircraft are going to. So they do try the hunter groups and the attack groups, but again, it's in the Mediterranean, and you get a lot of false positives in terms of. There are also good things for false positives for the submarines. Okay. One of the false positives the submarines get is they think they are far more. The smaller subs are far more invisible than they think they are. Because again, where are you practicing in the Mediterranean? In the deeper parts of the Mediterranean. You're not usually practicing inshore in the shallower parts. And this causes a in World War II. So exercises are very useful. They provide a lot of learning and a lot of development of Royal Navy anti-submarine warfare and Royal Navy submarine warfare in the interwar period. But like all exercises, they are open to false positives. This is why I always argue that you need to do both the exercises and a study of war. And anyone who turns around and goes, yes, but the technology is now so different, we don't need to study the past. Studying the past has no lessons for us. First lesson that you should learn from studying the history of warfare is that whilst technology is always changing, some lessons are immutable. And the first lesson that is immutable, and this is it's the first thing and the first thing you should learn, is that when you get into war, technology rarely works as advertised or predicted. It usually has more cons and also some unexpected advantages. Yowza. Right. Dan Freeman, it could have been worse than baked beans returns. The British could have been drinking cappuccino after 11 a.m. at the mall. The Canadian tribals could be putting pineapple on pizza. Oh, now I just had visions of one of the tribals firing a pineapple at an Italian ship with a note attached to it saying, "Apply this to your pizza." Found if the RN had 22 subs, the Australians would be like, "Can we have some, please?" Quite possibly. No, you didn't kill the mood, Carl Harmon. I'm sorry to hear you've had such a tough time. That squad. Yeah, I managed to upset one of my friends by showing them a picture of baked bean pizzas. Have a look up. Heinz actually made them. You could buy them for a few years. Dear doctor, that I often wonder while studying history now in the 21st century. Love to see how it works out for real versus advertised. I see it's going back 30 years tech-wise for reliability. Who knows? So, first question I often get asked is, why are these captains and these rear admirals? That's because the destroyers and the escorts have a rear admiral destroyers in the Mediterranean fleet and in the home fleet. So the submarines have a rear admiral submarines as the head of the service. The destroyers, the escorts, the anti-submarine forces have two. And these officers are supposed to do anti-submarine warfare expertise in promulgating air forces, as well as the other things which destroyers are supposed to do. And let's give us a clue. One of those rear admiral destroyers in the 1930s was a guy called Andrew Cunningham. So, not exactly bad officers. But these are stone-cold specialists. And you can look down that list and you go, good, capable. These are also very good officers. Very, very capable officers. Now, I could do an entire video going through the careers of these officers to try and illustrate their skills and capabilities. But what instead I'm going to do is this. I'm going to give an example of just one. He was the director, the chief of the submarine service 1921 to 1923. He was also director of naval intelligence 1919 to 1921. And he was chief of the SIS, that's the Special Intelligence Service, the MI6, from 1923 to 1939. He was Sir Hugh Francis Paget Sinclair, or as he was often known to his officers in the intelligence services, QX Sinclair, or simply Q. Yes, this is the British equivalent of Canaris. Unfortunately, he dies in November 1939 from complications of surgery to try and remove cancer. But that's not exactly a bad officer to find for command of your submarine service. Q. And it's one of the reasons why I love the James Bond movie where Q is aboard his command submarine. That just seems so appropriate to me. Consequence. One prof I had proclaimed that you need to metaphorically murder your dissertation advisor, i.e. academics are like the Sith. Do you agree? No. Pointless. Thomas Vanderbilt, did the subs and air forces ever hold exercises together or any ideas, tactical exchange going on there? There were lots of exercises. There are lots of exercises going on together and lots of exchanges going on with the officers getting together in the home fleet. There are exercises between destroyers and submarines in the Mediterranean fleet. The Royal Navy has had a history of, well, these days it's called the Thursday War, where every ship that's available in the UK goes to war every Thursday as a full day of exercises and warfare, and basically a full exercise against each other. And the RAF and the Royal Marines and the Army tends to get invited along as well, if they feel like playing. But it's been a constant exercise. I was talking the other week about the night exercises that destroyer crews are doing. Again, if a week goes by without a destroyer exercise, it's bad. If a month goes without a week goes by without a night exercise, it's considered bad on the flotilla leader. They better have a good reason. If a day goes by without a torpedo attack to exercise for anti-shipping operations, it's they had better have a good reason, and a gunnery drill as well. If a month goes by without them having organized an anti-submarine exercise with a submarine from a nearby flotilla, or an anti-air exercise with some towed tugs, then they're going to be making a phone call to the rear admiral destroyers and going, why aren't you doing this for me? The Royal Navy has a really trained up destroyer fleet, and the only way you can be a really trained up destroyer fleet is if you have a really trained up submarine fleet for anti-submarine warfare. Gentleman Barrow, did he know Ian Fleming? I think they might well have had something connections, or at least Ian Fleming heard of him. Thank you, Callum Gasworth. Dev Squad, are you going to cover the women at the Western Approaches Command who played out the U-boat attacks and predicted future U-boat tactics and already created a counter-attack system? I've mentioned them in a few times already in other videos. I'm not going to cover them in this period because we're talking about the interwar period, and they come into in World War II. But again, they are an important part of it, and there are some very good books about them. In Carl, the Mediterranean exercises sometimes include Allied forces, notably France. Nope. No. They didn't. And to be fair, the French didn't ask us to their exercises either. It's not kind of they'd use Australia. There'd be Australian, Canadian, other Commonwealth navies would be there. Those were part of the big exercises, but not the French. Not. It's going to sound strange. Foreign countries. Georgian, didn't Ian Fleming work for intelligence in one of the World Wars? Yes. He worked for naval intelligence in World War II. No, Steve, he didn't work for MI5. He was naval intelligence and to an extent affiliated with MI6, which is SIS. Callum Gaswork, did the RN experiment with putting a float plane or two on a sloop? They did consider it, but honestly, they had carriers and they had other cruisers and other ships which carry float planes. You have to remember early in World War One, they tried putting float planes and seaplanes on monitors, which had given them a view on whether or not to do smaller ships and what the vis-a-vis benefits were. Come on, did the RN still do daily and weekly drills like the Thursday War? Yes. They still do it. The Thursday War is done every Thursday. I have been involved in several Thursday War exercises in my time. You know, going out and seeing them and watching what's going on and taking part occasionally if they don't mind me. And they're fun. And they do go full bore. But even I'm looking at it and going, this is done an exercise. See, when I'm not sure if you're trying to wind everyone up or you actually believe that. But SOE was their own department. They weren't in charge of the intelligence services, and they didn't coordinate the others. No. SOE is Ministry of Dirty Tricks. They're a different group. Anyway. So, the reality of anti-submarine and anti-submarine warfare and submarine warfare is it is underwater chess. Realistically, it's underwater 3D chess, multi-leveled, i.e. Star Trek style, or Big Bang Theory style, but I couldn't find a picture of people playing that, so this is the best I could find. And Serious, no, I just enjoy you being contrary and chance to get you get as you always are. Any chance you get as you always are. Thank you. I do realize you're trying to wind me up. It's sort of a case of I both find this amusing and the trouble is I actually have the thing you have to remember for me on my perspective, Steve, is I often have the conversation with people who actually do believe those things. And it's a case of, oh no. Anyway, so 3D underwater chess is pretty much what we're talking about. I know this isn't 3D underwater chess, but it's underwater magnetic chess, I think. And the point is, as much as you can see in advance, or you know in advance what's going on, you don't know. Chess, it's always asked, people go, oh, you must be able to predict your opponent's moves 2 moves ahead. Well, in submarine and anti-submarine warfare, you have to use your intelligence assets to try and predict what kind of technologies you're going to be dealing with 2 moves ahead. Because it takes time to build a submarine. And it takes time to develop countermeasures. Aztec. One of the interesting things is you sit there and go in World War II and people go, oh, you know, the Germans, they developed systems of getting away from submarine, from the Aztec. What they do is they run away at trying high speed, and then they do a fast turn when they're coming in for the kill with the depth charges. And, you know, this caught the British by surprise. It didn't. The British knew about it. That was why the British had come up with the idea they needed 2 escorts. The trouble was they didn't have enough escorts at the beginning of the war because they just started the escort building program to really build up numbers when war began. So it took time to have enough escorts to have the second escort. They knew exactly what the Germans were going to do, and they were doing their best to try and deal with that by fitting throwers and making as wide a dispersion of depth charge pattern as they physically could, and taking as many depth charges as they could, so they could just keep chucking explosive as rapidly as they could into the water to just turn the water into a churning mass of maelstrom to destroy that fricking submarine. But they can't do anything until they have either an ahead throwing system or until they have that second escort there. They know the problem. The exercises have shown them the problem. They understand the problem, but it's actually doing. One of the things that, again, the false positives you have in escorts, in exercises, and this is the example I give in the Mediterranean. We talked about earlier, people go, well, they didn't try it with merchant ships. They did, but they were with fleet auxiliaries. What do fleet auxiliaries tend to carry? They do tend to have some weapons or be considered in exercises to be armed. So that's why in exercises, a submarine never crops up in the middle of a convoy and attacks a convoy, because it wouldn't think of them, because they're all armed, because they're fleet auxiliary. So that's not sensible. But then when you're dealing with merchant convoys, most of the merchantmen don't have guns, if any do at all. And so stopping up in the middle of the convoy is sensible, because you can then take out your targets and you're fine. You're protected by the merchant ships from the escorts on the outside. So it's a false positive of the exercises for logical reasons, but no one sits back until, as I said, the Wrens and these officers sit down and work it out and go, hang on, that doesn't quite work. And when we wargaming it, this is what explains it. And the Germans think they've cracked a brilliant tactic with that one, because they don't think the British will ever work it out. The British do work it out, and it takes a while for the Germans to realise the Brits have worked it out. And the Brits only work it out once, as I said, when people are prepared to look at it crooked and go, hang on, that assumption we made based on that experience and exercises is faulty because of this. Oh. And you can sit there and go, oh, well, you see, they'd have worked it out if they'd hired real merchantmen to do it, but that would have cost money, and would have those merchant companies wouldn't have given those ships for free, because those ships would have been taking off trade routes and not been doing productive trade. So the Navy would have had to cover all those costs, and there wasn't the budget for that. So it happens. This is the trouble with the development of anti-submarine warfare and submarine warfare. You get false positives in exercises in peacetime that are quickly in wartime shown to be problematic. Again, the Royal Navy knows the T-class and the bigger submarines are not great for the Mediterranean. But the trouble is, they need submarines in the Mediterranean, they need submarines in the North Atlantic to blockade the Germans. They need to blockade the Italians and the Germans. And they don't have enough U-class, and they don't have enough S-class in service, so they have to bring in the O's, the P's, the R's, and the T's. And they know it's not a good idea. They don't want to get it to be a good idea to do it. Once those T-boats get out to the Far East, they do great guns. They're great out there because those are the waters they're designed for. And if they're in the Atlantic, they do fairly well in the North Atlantic as well. But in the Mediterranean, they don't. And the S-boats, they do fairly well in the Mediterranean. But real queens of the Mediterranean are the U-class. And that's because that's what they were designed for. So that's the trouble with anti-submarine warfare in interwar years. And that's the trouble with anti-submarine warfare to this day. If we think about it, the last time submarines engaged in a proper anti-submarine warfare with a peer opponent, or a near peer opponent, we're talking about the Falklands War. So, in reality, whilst they're doing shadow boxing, and there is shadow boxing going on all the time, all the way through the Cold War to this day, there is shadow boxing going on. That is not the same as war fighting. In some ways, it's more lethal, but in other ways, it isn't. In very realistic ways, they're not actually firing torpedoes at you. So, the reality is, we are now 39 years away, nearly 40 years away next year from the Falklands War. We'll be further away from the Falklands War next year than the Falklands War was away from World War II. That's a scary thing to think about when it comes to anti-submarine warfare and submarine warfare. How much of our current practice and current beliefs are based on exercises and theories, and exercises and theories, and exercises and theories. Stafford? Sounds Vandal. They sent out an old Anson on a suicide flight in the late 1930s to test the first airborne radar. Ironically, they even knew that Courageous was launching interceptors before they got told. Cal Harmon. So that's why HMS Pembroke did Friday to Sunday visits. She must have been at one of the ranges taking part. Cal Gosman, have you ever played collective card games? A while ago. Don't worry, Stafford. That's on Thomas Vanderveld, Underwater Chess. You tickled me. It's how it feels when playing SO3. Me versus DE on top. Move, counter move, then move again. Yeah. And if ever you want to do this as a game, there are actually I looked around in the UK, and there are some swimming pools which offer it. They do a monthly underwater chess tournament, which is just something that's cool. Most of the pictures I found of it advertising it, frankly, I wasn't going to use on my channel. But so I used this one of people scuba diving and playing chess. But you know, it's fun. Carmen, I cannot remember from life of me what viewing stations around Castle Martin. Military only. Sure, Mac. Did the British not ask the French to shut because they would turn up with Burnham saying we can aircraft carrier too, and the Royal Navy not knowing how to say no, you can't? That is possibly it, but also, let's be honest, there was quite a large chunk of the French Navy which the Royal Navy was prepared to laugh at. And most of it that they weren't prepared to laugh at, they would have liked to be in exercises, but they weren't really available till the late 1930s, by which time the Royal Navy was really conscious on practicing itself. Plus, the Royal Navy is very conscious in exercises of if you introduce other nations, A, they can get intelligence on you, but B, you might start to develop a reliance on them, and there's no guarantee they'll be there in wartime. The creeping barrage. That's why I hate being engaged by two escorts. The slow one keeps picking you, and you get peppered by the big. Yeah. Nick asks, roughly how many depth charges were carried on a sloop and an average destroyer, if there is such a thing? You are... Look, some destroyer... we're talking 90 plus depth charges. Some would be happily carrying in the hundreds. Some even more than that. And there were quite a few ships which were, this is your official load is 90. How many are you actually carrying? Well, about 120. Basically, they carry as many as they could fit. The high-speed rush also had another reason, namely producing cavitation bubbles. Turn is optional; it's a way to shake off Aztec operators too. And yes, and the Germans also developed a chemical pellets they put out, which would create fluctuations in the water. Right then, so we've got through this quicker than I thought we were going to. So, any questions, anyone? Because about another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to call it quits for live this evening and get back with recording a video, which I meant to record earlier today. The video for Monday is going to be recorded after this. In the Falklands War, did Argentina subs attempt to attack the British fleet? If so, how were they thwarted? They didn't really. There was one which was in position to attack the Royal Navy, but she was actually thwarted by surface gunfire because she was caught on the surface in South Georgia, which wasn't good for her. I think she might have actually been engaged by mortars and machine guns. At the start of the war, 40, then 80, and near war's end, the standard load for a corvette was 180. Destroyers up to 220 or something? Read it up a long time ago. Yeah, you're pretty much there. Sloops are designed with 90, and it just keeps growing. And then there's the standard load, which is the official load, and there's the load the captains actually put on. Okay, did the RN get any US early homing torpedoes in World War II? I think towards the end of part of World War II, they did have some sort of something which is basically considered a homing torpedo, but it wasn't. Let's put it this way: it didn't. You have it, and it takes a while to get it into service fully and into widespread service. And they would rotate in and out of battle as per one that most of the DCs left, but they had 40 on deck, so ready to go. It took quite some time to get them from the hold, so they switched places then. Guy, one. British and the Falklands had 3 SSNs, and most of the surface force was ultimately for ASW. They had Conqueror, Swiftsure. I get a little bit more than 3 once I'm talking about the whole the length of the war. Michelin, yes, using the aft signal ejector to launch countermeasures. We used to use it to launch rotten grapefruit out onto the halo deck of the tender during the morning waters. That's cool. Dr. Clarke, are the MECO frigates adequately kitted out to be effective at ASW platforms? They can be. MECO frigates can be modified quite often and are quite, in a old-fashioned modular way, modular. But guys, what was the biggest kill by an RN submarine in World War II? I think it was. Killed by a submarine, I think, was a German merchant ship. But they did take out some pretty hefty Italian ones as well. Guy01, will new tech like lithium-ion batteries or other AOP change submarine warfare significantly? We honestly don't know. It could do, or it could be these are the ultimate versions of the U-class boats. This is what you could be talking about. You don't know until you actually. It's one thing on paper, and it's one thing on simulation and simulations and exercise. It's quite another once you're actually going into the war fighting. And also, this is the other problem. I always try and tell people and explain is you have to remember when we do a computer simulation, these simulations are based on programming, are based on things put in there but inputted by humans. And the trouble is that data is often drawn from the exercises. So that can then reinforce the false positives, or it might not be. In which case, if it's drawn from, let's say, you take a war, you use your learning of history and you to take the exercise, then you can be discussed as being more theoretical, because if you're using stuff which is from your interpretation of past events and adding that into the data, interpreting data through that, you're adding another layer of interpretation. And you might be right in your estimates, you might be wrong. So simulations are good, but they're not necessarily 100% accurate. Jeremy, if I remember correctly, someone in South Georgia wasn't able to dive because of a Carl Gustav hit. Might well have been a Carl Gustav rather than a mortar around now thinking about it. Nighttime Productions, I annoyingly don't have a question. I missed too much of this stream. Seems like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Don't worry, there's a long patrol as well tomorrow. Anjet Rapol, largest submarine iron sub-kill for Warship World War II is probably the heavy cruiser Ashigara, sunk by HMS Trenchant. Yeah, but she's only 10,000. She's only roughly 11,000 tons, and I think there is a 14,000 ton merchant ship which is sunk. I'm not 100% sure why I think that. I could be wrong. But no, there are records of U-boats surviving over 500 plus depth charges and 30 hours of dropping, so that gives you an idea about the average firepower they had in smaller escort groups. Vision, off topic, I was a bit amazed that the USN's RIM Talos AA missile was bigger in weight and length than the Japanese Oka rocket kamikaze, which inspired its creation through Operation Bumblebee. Doesn't surprise me. John Barrett, Ashgar was attacked by destroyers, I think, in 1945. I think you mean Taco, we captured in Singapore? I would have to check into that. I would have to go and look that one up. It's going to sound terrible, but I am not trusting my memory today. I have my notes for this one, and I am not going off it. I have been dealing with Christmas lights, EDF, and BT internet. My brain, other than my notes, is fried. 96831 aren't the Nelson class fast battleships? No. They could have been if you put in some more boilers. Or put in space for some more boilers to be added in the late 1930s. I think they should have been fitted for, not with extra boilers, to boost up their turbines and give them the power to get to conservatively at least 28, 29 knots. Right, what have we got coming up? We've got the Abdiel class on 28th of December. We've got the Kent class counties on the 4th of January. Then we have a bit of a interesting trick. Does anyone guess what the link is between the Abdiel class, the Nautilus class, the Pluton, and the Brummer class are? Angent Repol, Shiogara was a Mayoko class, close to 14,500 tons. The one that the destroyers got was Hagoro in the Strait of Malacca. There wasn't a tribal there for that one. If I remember correctly, the tribals were off doing another little interesting operation on their own. The other destroyers were going, we're hunting down a cruiser. That's good. You're in a pack. You've got support. Go enjoy. The tribals were off doing a naughty little operation, clearing the path on the way to Singapore. But were there any famous RN subs or commanders with large kill counts like the USN had? Yes, if you go and look at my video on the 10th flotilla, you will find a full list of them. Mostly they were U-boat commanders. I was asking, all mine layers. Yep, all mine laying cruisers. So I thought I did a bit of thing, because I think mines are a bit of a forgotten thing about for World War II and for modern warfare. Also, you notice that the vote is in. The 1905 to 1906 and 1911 Morocco crisis is what won the YouTube public vote. So, based on comments, that's what's going to be on the 30th of December. I think I've never seen anyone call a Nelson class a fast battleship. Usually they're just called battleships. They are not the speed definition of a fast battleship by any stretch of the imagination. King George V's fast battleships, Vanguard fast battleships, Iowa class tend to get called fast battleships, but I'm fairly sure if the Montanas have been built, they might have been referred to as battle cruisers. It's one of those interesting scenarios going on. Take care, Sean V. Geoguy, 1101. Only one Japanese heavy cruiser survived the war and surrendered to the British. Ah, yes. Sometimes. Thank you, Vision. Buy a lumber coal for BC. I was thinking more about buying a mallet for them, but okay. Nicole Ross, did the RN have an equivalent of the USS England that sank multiple submarines? Yes, basically any of the Black Swan class. Look at some of the Black Swans, and they just get kill counts of submarine after submarine after submarine. The Royal Navy has quite a few hunter-killer groups, and the Black Swans usually rack them up quite heavily. There are also a few flyer-class corvettes which have suspiciously high kill rates, almost like they have a direct line to Bletchley Park, and the submarine will be here. Take care, Patrick Lane. Google's not loading. Take care, John Shea. Thank you, Thomas Naval. Thank you very much, everyone. Please look out. There are going to be specials coming out on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. Recorded videos on M33 and M29, the M29 class. And as said, there are going to be videos right the way through. Hope you enjoy. Shumac, would you ever do a video on Japanese submarine anti-submarine warfare? There'd be a good face palms as well as discussing an undiscovered subject. I would do, but I would want more books and research on it before I attempted it. So I'd want to probably a few months before to get the books in place before I'd consider that topic. I am trying to buy more Japanese and more Italian and German and American sort of history stuff. I do have quite significant connections of American, Japanese surface unit stuff and Japanese aircraft units. American stuff, I have pretty much everything, thanks to Norman having a fairly inclusive Norman Freeman collection, so everything's pretty much covered in detail, at least in some of his books. And but an Italian I've always worked and always been interested in. But I have to admit, if I'm looking at German and Japan, if I was going to start doing Axis anti-submarine warfare, I'd want to buy some more books, because I'm sure there must be some out there. If there aren't, I'll have to go do the research for them. That's fine. Take care, the G40. Thank you, old Richard. Thank you, Alsaski. Will you also do RP Griff? Yes, I'll probably be having a look at that at some point. Cruiser mine layer from the lovely French. Hey, good lord. Good luck, Vitron. Take care, George Newman. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Grace Sarsky. Thank you, Colin Gosberg. Thank you, Thomas Hanova. At one point, the British escort stopped dropping since it'd been nearly 40 hours, and they heard that the boat wasn't going. They heard the boat was going to make it because it sank to 1,000 feet, but it did put back up later. Nice one. Take care, Geo Guy. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Thank you, Anna Rapol. We will hope Wimbrel makes it back as a museum. That would be lovely if she did. It would be lovely to have at least another ship. Thank you, Richard Orter. Thank you, Jonathan Burrow. Thank you, Mateo Slavic, Albert Salitsky. Thank you, Rick Sava. Thank you, Melanie6040. Thank you, Tanya Felica. Thank you, Patrick Clayton. Thank you, Jack Ray. And thank you, Richard Orter. I think I'm not sure if I missed you. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and have a nice evening. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Dan, Stafford, and Sean for doing your lovely work as admins. That's been very kind of you. You've kept the chat very nicely this evening. And thank you, Nicole Ross. Nicole Ross, I'm shocked. Shocked you want to buy more books. Yeah. Any chance I get. My sister's fairly certain that her office is not going to be her office forever. Thank you, Kevin Ray. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Kevin. Tell us, do we put Bruce Willis into Home Alone or Kevin into Die Hard? Oh, Kevin into Die Hard. That's just fun. Let's be honest, Bruce Willis and Kevin. If we have those two characters in Die Hard, that's just a nightmare, and we get to hear a terrorist having an actual panic attack. Take care, everyone. Thank you. No, Zachary Gherkin. Thank you. Thank you, Rogosowski. Thank you, Bill Bolton. Merry Christmas, everyone. Night. Take care. Hope you have a lovely Christmas. Hope you got all the books and all the presents you want, and your families have a wonderful day. Lots of food, lots of happiness, and everyone has a great day. Because that's really what we want and what Santa Claus wants. Take care. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. If for anyone who doesn't manage to join alive between now and New Year. And as I said, I hope you have a wonderful time and take care.